know?
Yeah.
And which is what the younger generation, and I'll read through, we just got this new turtle, so I read through 6 things last night, and then I'll make my own mental decision of what I think is best,
Yeah.
So I think that a lot of the younger generation, and then just people that need a quick answer, go to the internet, which everybody's put anything on the internet, so you're getting all kinds of stuff, and then I just make my own conclusion of what makes sense to me.
Right.
So, which is dangerous and scary, and how the world has become a lot of ways to go,
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the internet's a wonderful resource for accumulating random bits of knowledge. And Wikipedia is awesome. Seriously, you're talking to a guy that spent 5 years writing a dissertation. You know how many times I peeked into Wikipedia to find out what was said there? Now, I tell my students, never do that. Never quote Wikipedia.
Right.
And the reason why is because anybody can go in and say anything that they want on Wikipedia. But the responsible way to use Wikipedia is to look at the little footnotes. And you go down to the bottom of the page and you find where those books are quoted. Now, let me tell you a little dirty secret. I have what will now be 1, 2, 3, 4 books with, either with my name on the cover or with an essay or two written by me in book. Published books. One of them's coming out from Oxford University Press. So, the Oxford Handbook on the Oxford Movement. And so you don't get a much more reputable press than Oxford University Press, and you don't get, but let me confess something to you. I'm wrong. I'm certain about 1/3 of what I believe. And so about 30% of what I believe, I'm wrong. And the problem is that I don't know which 30%. So, even being able to consult the internet and chasing down the footnotes, I'm terrified that people are picking up my book and quoting me as an authority. I think I can make a defensible argument. I think that I can argue the point. But you know what? If you go into my office, I've got 3 giant shelves on John Henry Newman and Anglicanism in the 19th century. And there's just so much that's been written about that very, very, very small context that if you get me into a room full of Newman scholars, there are going to be 8 different opinions. So, the problem is that, even access to resources, you say, how do I weigh these? You get these kind of, and you know that they're out there. You've got sort of crackpot, either, way at the liberal fringe Catholics, or crackpot, way at the right, and respected Catholics, and you go, I have no idea that people believe that kind of stuff. There are Catholics running around right now that think that the See of Rome, that the papacy is vacant. They call them state of Vatican. Yeah, state of Vatican. Sorry, tongue twister. But basically, it's an empty seat. That Pope Francis is not the true Pope, but an anti-Pope. And they believe the same thing about Benedict XVI, and the same thing about John XXIII, and the same thing about Pope John Paul II. And these folks are running around as super Catholics.
Who was the last Pope they had believed?
They probably the Pope prior to John XXIII. Was it Pius XII? No, it was Leo XIII. Does that sound right? Yeah. I think that's right. But basically, anybody prior to Vatican II, is okay. But Vatican II was the, So you got the Society of St. Pius X, and those guys. It's a super radical effort, and you read what they say and you just go, wow, I have no idea that my faith was that. So how do you trust it?
You were talking about where do Protestants go when they have questions. pastor. Well, sometimes the pastor isn't as scholarly as you are, so that's the downside of it.
Yeah.
So is it safe to say that Catholicism is more centralized than some of the others that are open to all philosophy?
Yeah.
And I know there are differences in people's interpretation.
Yeah, but even there, the centralization helps things, and it helps things in a couple of different ways. Number one, you don't have the proliferation of episcopal opinion. You have a bishop, and that bishop is in communion with the Bishop of Rome, with the Pope. And so there's a fairly linear and a very easily traceable line of authority and clear lines of accountability. And so that, you know this all too well. I mean, if you had a priest get up on a Sunday morning and, say that Mary is not the mother of God, or that Christ is only present in a spiritual way in the Eucharist, but not really and truly present, you'd be able to dial up Bishop Terry and say, hey, listen, I'm a little concerned that, some things that are being taught are explicitly run counter to the catechism or the teachings of our faith. What's going on here? And, Bishop Terry, being a conscientious bishop, would talk to the priest and say, what's going on here? and would look for some clarification. So the line of accountability is nice, and the lines of authority being pretty clear are nice in that regard. The other thing is just organizationally, because you have standards for education that are very, very clear. You just can't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to start a Catholic church. You can't ordain yourself. Have you ever seen The Apostle, the movie with Robert Duvall in it? I love the scene, I love the movie. It's a great film. But he decides that he's going to baptize himself an apostle. And there's this moment where he's standing out in the river up to about chest high, and he says, I baptize myself. And he comes out, and suddenly he's an apostle. And that's a kind of a cottage industry. It's a big issue in Marion and West Memphis, Arkansas, where I've been for the last 5.5 years pastoring a church. I've been an Anglican priest and a fairly Catholic Anglican priest. But when we go to meetings of our Magisterium Association, there's this revolving door of and some are African American, some are white, some are Latino, where it's really easy to start churches as a moneymaker. You rent a storefront, on Missouri Street, and you start meeting for worship, and the Pentecostal Holiness Temple, the World Changers International, they'll name it, all these different names, and they'll have 15 or 20 people, and these people start giving money, and it supplements the income. So it's a really easy way, without a lot of education, to start a kind of for-profit business. That and daycare, seem to be two easy ways to sort of form up a business if you don't have any formal credentialing or training. So, these guys will come into the pastor's council meetings, and they'll have these off-the-wall initiatives, and you'll be talking at lunch, and they'll come up with these off-the-wall doctrines. That it doesn't look like we're going to meet next month because it looks like the rapture is going to happen. And you go, why do you believe that? What leads you to that conclusion. I recognize that there are Protestants that believe that, Christians are going to be caught up into the air before Jesus comes and all that. But what gives you warrant to say before next month's meeting, oh, there's going to be a blood moon, like there was the other night, a lunar eclipse, that turns the moon red, and that's going to be a sign that corresponds to the Jewish festival of Rosh Hashanah, and poof, there's going to be a rapture. And you get to the next monthly meeting, and either that pastor's not there because his church closed because he couldn't pay his rent. And so that's, sort of how some of this stuff proliferates. And so, then you go, okay, well, so let me tell you how this worked for me, both as a Presbyterian and as an Anglican. And I'll give you a couple nice ways to hang this on.
I have a comment.
Sure.
One thing that I try to do with people on certain subjects is relate it to everyday life.
Okay.
Like when I talk about Mary, don't you honor your mother, kind of stuff.
Right.
Something that they can actually relate to.
Right.
It takes it out of the document.
Yeah. And that's I think a pretty good way of moving around, because when you start talking about Bible or the Olympian church battles that separate denominations, you do end up in these sort of intractable wars. It's a little bit like World War I. You've got one trench separated, with a no man's land from another trench. And they're shooting over top of one another, but because they're down in the trenches, no one kills anybody, and nobody gets to get up and wander out into no man's land. So the battle of the Somme, goes for how long? Because you've got two trenches lobbing, artillery over the wall. And so moving it sort of beyond, your Bible says versus my Bible says. And actually coming down to some practical,
It's kind of like getting them to understand the concept.
Right. And that can be very helpful, for some people. And I think that's a useful strategy. I think, for the most part, this is a universal law that fighting with Protestants is an abstraction. Just like fighting with gays is an abstraction. Fighting with divorced folks is a distraction, abstraction. When you're actually sitting across the table with an individual, and that abstraction becomes personal, where you're simply saying, this is how I think about my faith, and this is my account of what I believe. Well, all of a sudden you go from being an abstraction as a Catholic to being an actual person. This person doesn't know Catholics in the abstract. They know a Catholic who believes this, and they discover, wow, that person isn't so heretical. Or ridiculous, or superstitious, or whatever line you want to make. So I think that's a good strategy.
I just kind of want to say, from my behalf, not being Catholic my whole life, just to keep up with that, because becoming Catholic, I talked with Mary, but saints as well, and I never understood why you would go to a saint to ask for prayer, And then my best friend died, and Joe said, well, do you believe she was in heaven? I said, well, yeah, He said, well, wouldn't you ask her to pray? She's sitting right next to Jesus, but you have to pray for her, for her to intercede for you. And I was like, oh, thanks, So then that started, but until it was related to me on a daily, on a common ground of what I can understand. So I would just encourage you to keep doing that, because, it may not help everybody, but, it may trigger one person, and that's helped me a lot with faith. I still don't have that full grasp as much as the deepest cradle Catholics do or things like that, but it makes sense to me, and I can understand it, and I can appreciate it now, instead of being so hands up to it and saying, I don't believe that,
Because I was a Southern Baptist, then Church of Christ, then a